All right. Hi there, rompereglas. Welcome to day 3 of Revolutionary Relationships. And today we are talking about becoming a nervous system ninja. So day one, we talked about the energetics of intimacy and connection and how our energy matrices that are affected by our wounding, by our early life experiences are always interacting with one another. And the relationship that you have with fear is really vital in allowing you or enabling you to open pathways to creating relationships that support the conditions for healing some of those early intimacy wounds. In day 2, we went over the 5 energetic relational strategies that we all use and how tracking them supports you in attuning to your fear, to your needs, to your desires underneath each one. And that helps deepen your capacity for intimacy and connection by allowing you to bring them into conversation in the present moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about sort of the nitty-gritty of that today. So today we're talking about becoming a nervous system ninja, mind mastery, which is, I'm not really sure I really like the term mastery, but we'll go with it because it's what people are used to saying. We're also going to talk about uncolonizing mind, body, spirit, talk about the space between embodied relational presencing, which is the main tool that is sort of at the foundation of how I teach, and conscious communication as a way to create safety and to soothe the nervous system. All right. So obviously your nervous system is really, really complex, and I'm not going to nerd out on you. You can get into all sorts of texts around nervous system. I'm just going to say the basics, assuming that you already know. What I'm really going to be focusing on is the process. So it's really about I'm just going to give you what you need to know so that you can anchor in your sovereignty and reclaim your energetic authority. So obviously your nervous system is central because it actually runs in the background of all of your life, in all of your relationships, in every single moment. It is constantly working to assess for safety. Constantly. There's not a moment where it's not assessing for safety, unless you're in a safe and social state, which it gets to take a break. That's fantastic. But the awareness of how your nervous system is tracking safety in the environment can be subtle or obvious. And if you're not tracking what your nervous system is doing, it will run the show if you're not aware of it. So, I'm just going to name sort of the different states. Fight is one of the states. Is that it's an activation. It's a healthy activation. Generally speaking, it can be destructive if you acting out in anger or, just bring that energy outwards. Obviously, we see that a lot, but it can also be constructive because fight energy is what activates you into asserting yourself in healthy ways. And a lot of us, a lot of people, I'm not going to say women or men, but especially women, have underactivated fight responses. And that's a lot of what I work with in terms of reclamation of energetic authority and sovereignty. It really is about bringing that fight activation outward in healthy ways so that we can feel our boundaries, so that we can feel our edges and advocate for ourselves in healthy ways. So then there is fight, which is escape, freeze. It's an often involuntary state of just kind of not a collapse necessarily, but just a tightening. Then there's the fawn response, which is appeasement. This is also the way that we have power under in our relationships versus the unhealthy or destructive fight activation, which is power over. And then we have the free, which is safe and social. And so you have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and free. So out of the 5 states, and there's other ones that are mixed states, but I won't get into those. only one of them is safe and social. So we have these 4 different states that are fear-based, right? They're all fear-based except for one. And so I want you to appreciate that from the perspective of like, there is a lot that is running and that we are assessing constantly for that safety, for just to see if it's okay to be here. And I want to just name something that many people don't talk about, but really like what your nervous system holds. And your nervous system holds your personal trauma. It's shock trauma, but also the intimacy wounds, which some people call developmental trauma, as well as the trauma of your ancestors through epigenetics. And then there's the collective trauma, for example, of slavery or other types of genocide. You also have the collective conditioning into systems of disempowerment, which is the conditioning into white supremacy that underwrites patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. So I just want to name that as like, this is the charge that our nervous systems are holding. And because this generation, like where we are now in the historical timeline, we are the ones that are doing the deep healing work that our ancestors weren't able to do, perhaps because they didn't have the luxury to do it, or, you know, it was that consciousness just wasn't part of the times. So, you know, the whole load that we're holding in our nervous system really narrows our capacity to hold, because it's like spring loaded with fear. And a lot of the healing work that we're doing, and especially that's going to be part of the sovereign meta body, is really about expanding nervous system capacity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later and why that's important, about like opening the space in the nervous system. So when there's a nervous system experience or response, this is important. When there's a nervous system experience or response, there's a patterned thought that goes along with it, right? And there are patterned thoughts that go with the experiences of growing up inside systems of disempowerment, for example. And I call these livids. This is the lack, right? The experience of being simultaneously too much and not enough. There's the isolation, feeling that you're separate from spirit or from God. There's victimhood, feeling that you're powerless in the world. There's imposter, which is, you know, an imposter phenomenon. It really is about like this experience of not feeling deserving. Then there's self-doubt, and then there's shame. And I want to name that these are universal experiences. Like, I don't know a single human that doesn't have these pattern thoughts, because we all grow up in this environment, right? So it's not personal, it's universal. It's our universal fragmentation and our universal separation from our divinity. And these are colonized beliefs that we acquire in the process of growing up. And there are also pattern thoughts that go along with intimacy wounds, which I'll give a few examples in a second, but I want to just name like that, like these live in the brain and in the body. A lot of mindset work just focuses on top down, like mastering your mind and like moving it down into the body. And I used to be a person who was all about the body work and not doing any of the mindset work. And yeah, I found after 4 years of intense somatic training, I had really cleared up so much space in my body. And I had so much evidence to not believe the thoughts of my inadequacy or my insecurities. I had so much evidence that that wasn't real. And yet my brain was still telling me the stories. And so that's when I really became aware of the need to really curate my thoughts and to really engage them in thoughtful ways, so to speak, but to really choose what I thought with intention, just like you choose what clothes you're going to wear in the morning. Really, it's about like, okay, I'm not going to believe that, or I am going to believe that, or I'm going to choose as an alternative to this particular belief, I'm going to believe something else. So, and what I found in my practice of working with people, most of our struggles go back in some form or another to either the, what I call the livids, the beliefs around our collective brainwashing into systems of disempowerment, or our conditioning into intimacy wounds. And if you can identify the story that's connected to the hurt, you can decide how you want to respond to that thought, if you're going to believe it or not. And if you decide not to believe it, then you can find alternative evidence. So you want to be curious about, going back to the nervous system, you want to be curious about how your nervous system is responding at any given moment. Remember that your nervous system is constantly tracking for safety. It's never resting, except when you're sleeping. And even then you're having dreams. But your nervous system is like the quiet hum in the background of your experience. And what I find when working with people is that most people don't hear it. Most people don't hear the hum unless it gets really fucking loud, and then we can't deny it, right? And that's when we're already like super activated. So, what I talked about on Monday about being able to track fear, it really comes down to being able to, be a ninja with your nervous system, like really like quietly tracking the more subtle things that are happening. So, and when beliefs are held, like I said earlier, both in the body and in the mind. And I just want to name that beliefs are thoughts that have been repeated. So if you can, do a mindset practice that helps you believe new thoughts and you repeat it, part of the practice is, then you can bring a new reality into the body. So yesterday we went over the 5 intimacy wounds. Today I'll just drop a few of the pattern thoughts that go along that are really common. So yesterday we talked about the creative strategy, and a lot of the pattern thoughts around the creative strategy is that, like, I don't matter. And there's this sense of the world not being a safe place. And there is a pattern thought like, I'm a free spirit, I'm unattached to the material world, or it's not safe for me to be here, I don't want to be here. And that's sort of what feeds the leaving strategy. In the merging strategy, there is this fundamental belief based on the experience of not having gotten enough that feeds the thought of never enough. I'll never get enough love. I'll never have enough food, or there's a scarcity thinking all the way. I'll never have enough money. So there's always a sense of like, not enough. And it just feeds into this hustle versus the reality that maybe there is enough, maybe there is sufficiency. And it's just like, because the belief is so in the body, the mind is sort of going on that track. Then there is the enduring strategy, which is the pattern thought around that tends to be, I'm unappreciated. And there's the belief that struggling is noble. Like, thank you, you're welcome. There's this belief that struggling is noble, like suffering is like useful in some way. And there is a sense of like these are the really hard workers, and they really get off on working hard. And they feel like it's part of their it's like a virtue. And they're constantly feeling unappreciated for the hard work that they do, but they don't really see that they're doing it to themselves. And then there's a challenger strategy, which is this belief around surrender or giving in, or surrender is weak. There's this emphasis on control, right? I'm in control. It's going to be my way, right? And there's the whole strategic process around being in control, and that happens in a lot of different ways. And then in the rigid strategy, there's the belief that or the thought, I'm a loving person and I'm not understood. Nobody understands me. No one's going to hurt me again. And this is why I'm doing with my energy what I need to do. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if that resonates with you, if any of these thoughts resonate with you. So going into mind mastery again, the ego and the nervous system work in tandem. Your ego will inevitably tell you a story that matches the activation and the intensity of the activation in your nervous system. Again, all in an effort to keep you safe. So let's say your partner leaves dishes in the sink. And if your wounding is around not being appreciated, your thought process will see the dishes in the sink and will go to, my partner doesn't appreciate me. And then you will be angry. This thought will fuel angry emotions. So there'll be the activation creates an egoic thought, ego-based thought, that then fuels an emotion. So, and then we end up having conflict with our partners. Like, you don't appreciate me. Why did you do that? You keep doing that. You know, instead of recognizing like, oh, this is the story that I have around, I have a story around not being appreciated. I know that about myself. So let me check in with my partner and get the facts. Did you leave the sink? Did you leave the dishes in the sink because you don't appreciate me or because you just forgot? So it allows you to, if you know that story, if that's one of your stories, you can come back to it and come to your partner with curiosity and say, hey, let me check the facts. Like, is this for real? Or am I just telling myself the same story? And then they can say yes or no. So oftentimes, a lot of these thoughts that we have, thoughts about self-doubt, thoughts about not being lovable, or thoughts about beliefs around rejectability, for example, that are connected to these intimacy wounds. There's what in the trauma literature they call overcoupling. There's this over-identification with the beliefs and the ego. And mindset work, the reason why it works is because it's about decoupling. It's about creating a little bit of spaciousness between the belief and who you are as a whole person. So this was really, really helpful. Well, let me just say this, that, oftentimes when we're in a conflict with a partner, the way that I learned it in my training is that oftentimes, like they say what's hysterical is historical, right? When we have a really strong reaction to something, it's usually coming from our intimacy wounds. And the way I learned it in my training is that it's an 80-20 split. Usually 80% has to do with not now in this moment, and 20% does have to do with this moment. So you want to get curious about what the 80% is, sort that shit out, and then bring that into the 20% that's actually happening right now. And this was so helpful to me because recognizing what my pattern thoughts were helped me realize when I was in story versus when I was in a real intuitive truth, where I was like, oh no, I'm really feeling this. This is real in this moment. I know what my stories are. This is not feeding into this now. So I was able to create some separation there. And sometimes I was so embedded in my story. I remember one time that I was like so in my story about not being included in something and in a conversation, and like my whole brain and body was flipping out. And I brought it to my partner at the time and I said, look, I'm telling myself a story here, and I want to check in whether it's true or not. I want to see like what part of this is reality or not. And they were able to say, actually, no, that's not the story. And I was able to release it and let it go. But imagine if I had totally believed the story and come into that dynamic from this place of like, yeah, this is true. And you've been doing this and this and this, right? And activating maybe destructive fight response, right? Based on my nervous system feeling unsafe. So what I want you to get out of today ultimately is the understanding that you need to get really, really good. You need to get like ninja skills at tracking your nervous system and your ego story in different situations and relationships. And again, this is always happening. So whenever you're with anyone, because you are energetic matrices interacting with one another, there is always activations happening. There's always movement. You'd be surprised. We were doing an exercise one time where we were at a cocktail party, or we were pretending we were at a cocktail party, and we were just noticing where the energy was moving in our bodies, and we would sort of put our hands on the parts of our body where we would feel the energy whenever we were standing with a person, and the energy would be here, then it would move to here, then it would move to the pelvis or the legs, and then it would move somewhere else, and then it would change when you were with someone else. So this is always moving, and we have people in our lives that remind us of other people. We have perhaps, maybe you're in a situation where your boss reminds you of someone, and this person, you don't know who it is, but every time they walk in the room, you feel intimidated, you go into appeasement mode, and you're like, why am I always doing that? I feel so competent in other areas, but here I feel so self-conscious. And perhaps that person reminds you of your father or somebody else in your life that had authority over you, that maybe had power, that used power over. And so that's information too about how you need to respond to yourself in those situations. Yeah, and these activations, what people call triggers, I like to call them activations. Use them as an invitation to go inward, right? A lot of times we don't want to be triggered. We don't want to be activated. But the truth is that activations are a gift, and they're an invitation to go inward. Usually our response when we get activated is to go out, to protect ourselves, right? Or protective strategies, boom, right? We go out. But your activations are clues as to what's conditioned, what wants to be healed, where's the threat. And when you follow the thread of the threat, you usually will land in some form of intimacy wound. So I want to talk a little bit about the space between, because the space between is that, like, when we get activated, it activates like our limbic system. It's sort of like in the back of the brain, and creating the space in the nervous system, as I was talking about earlier, is about like pausing, getting curious as to what's going on inside, and basically walking your way from the part that's activated, which is in your limbic system, all the way to your prefrontal cortex, where you can be in more choice and activate sort of a more conscious way of relating. And for people who have experienced more developmental trauma or intimacy wounds, that walk is a lot more difficult, is really going to feel like, whoa, like I'm crawling my way, I'm crawling my way there. So yeah, I just really want to offer that as a piece of compassion, because it's like that whole walk is work. The more you practice it, the easier it is. So when you get activated, you want to be asking yourself, what is coming up that wants to be healed? And be willing to listen, be willing to listen to your intuition. And I have like a way that I do this that I'll talk about in a moment. Because sometimes it's part of our lived experience. Like sometimes these activations go back to something that we experienced, but sometimes they go back to ancestral experiences. Sometimes they go back to histories that are beyond our lifetime. And so I want you to also be aware of that. This is sort of where the magic of healing comes in. So when you can track what's happening, you can get curious about what's making you feel unsafe. You can meet the places that need safety. You offer that to yourself first, right? Because oftentimes we want other people to make ourselves feel safe, make us feel safe, but it's really us, it's really you that does this first, right? Meet the places that need safety. You meet yourself, you regulate yourself, and you make more grounded choices from that place of courage and trust. And this is how you build safety and trust within your own system. And when you're able to sort of go inward first and meet yourself and meet those parts that are activated, you can come into relating in a way that is where there's cleaner communication, and it helps you be out of the reactivity and to be able to name what is happening. So the way that I teach this is through a practice called embodied relational presencing. And there's lots of people in the world that have different names for this. I call it embodied relational presencing because we are in relationship to everything. And oftentimes, what I want to invite you to is having a relationship to the reactivity, having a relationship with your nervous system, having a relationship with the wound that's arising, having a relationship with the story, having a relationship with the ego, and to really have a compassionate relationship, a relationship of approval, let's say, with these parts that come up. So first you want to approach with curiosity. And then you want to bring curiosity, or you want to bring breath rather to the activation. And you bring breath into the body because you want to create some space around it. The more space it has, the better you are able to listen to what's arising. So you want to be in a type of self-inquiry. You want to be asking this activation, what do you need from me? What do you want me to see and feel? And that's when we're able to sort of ask the question, we can listen for the answer. And oftentimes there's a lot of intuitive wisdom that comes through, and which is why I'm so excited about the sovereign meta body, is because you're going to leave this program so incredibly attuned to your inner landscape, and your intuition is going to be so much stronger, which is like, it's incredible. So, and after the compassionate self-inquiry, there's the aligned action, right? There's like, okay, so you listened and now you respond to the wisdom that came up in that activation. And sometimes the wisdom will be, maybe you have a talk with your partner, or maybe, maybe it's really just about you and not the other person. And that's all you need to do, because sometimes when we meet those places within ourselves, the activation just kind of like it dissolves, and then it's done. And then it's like, there's nothing else that's needed. So I want to talk a little bit about conscious communication using body wisdom, which is a downloadable PDF on my website, www.ishavela.com. So conscious communication using body wisdom is oftentimes like we're so in our strategic heads because we are in these strategies when we're having conversations. We want to be heard, we want to be seen. But oftentimes, the part of what I teach in my programs called devotion are about, can we see ourselves? Can you see yourself? Can you honor yourself first? And then bring it to your partner. It's really about like first filling up within yourself and then coming into partnership. So conscious communication using body wisdom, starts obviously with consent. Like, can we have this conversation? Is your nervous system ready to receive what I have to share? This is super important, because even just a couple of weeks ago, I got into a conversation where that consent wasn't there. And it was like, whoa, it was too much for me at the moment. And my reaction was to be angry and to want to push away, which is part of my intimacy. When it's like my strategy is to push away, you know what? I will reject. I will push away. I will isolate myself. And so I noticed that, and was able to sit with it and then recognize that I wasn't ready for that conversation. And then I was able to bring it to the person and be like, hey, can we build some consent around this? So there's consent, and then there's embodiment. And this is sort of a miracle. Like your body is amazing in that, like, by just naming what's happening in the body, you can have the deepest, most intimate, beautiful conversations, because we often talk about like, I'm thinking this and I'm feeling this, but you can go levels deeper by just naming what's happening in the body. Name the strategy, name the ego story, name the sensation. I'm feeling fear in my diaphragm. Or when you share this about yourself, the story that I'm telling myself is that you don't want to be with me. Or I'm really wanting to push you away right now, naming the strategy. And even though that sounds like we're saying something harmful, we're saying the truth of the strategy that's moving in your system right now. And it invites the other person to be in it with you. And it's vulnerable as fuck. And vulnerability, as you know, is sort of the foundation of connection. So the embodiment is really vulnerable because it names some of the more granular experiences that we experience in our body, and it brings it into the conversation. So it makes the implicit explicit. So, and then there's the process of downregulation, breathing. And sometimes, it can be really sexy to just, hey, I'm feeling really activated right now. Can we take a couple of breaths together? Can we just be together for a moment? I'm just feeling like such and such, right? And that's super intimate right there. You have more space for connection. And then finally, there's the last step, which is truth, right? Name what's true for you, because you're aware, when you're aware of the strategy that's moving, when you're aware of the ego story, and you can sort of filter those out and sort of like brushing aside those pesky little gnats, then you can really drill deeper into, you know what, this is what I need. Yeah, I have a need around this, or I have a desire to connect more with you, and we haven't been spending time together, and I really miss you. So it really gets to the heart of the matter, because a lot of what we argue about is content related, but it really is, you can stay, the body work or the embodiment piece helps you stay in the process versus the content. So final words here. When you are able to name what's arising, when you're able to just name the strategy, the ego story, it creates safety. It creates safety in your own body because you are showing up for yourself. So it builds safety and trust within your own body. Your body knows that you'll advocate. But because we hide so many parts of ourselves, because we don't want to be seen, or we're like, oh, if this person sees me, right, then we have the story of like being abandoned or being rejected. This person sees this part of me, it sees this vulnerable or young part of me. But just saying the thing helps create safety within yourself. The cat's out of the bag, as they say. It's a way to show up for yourself. It's truth, simply put, and your body feels that. But also it invites that intimacy in relationship, and it just allows you to drop in a deeper way. And this is why I'm so excited about the group process work in the sovereign meta body, is because it really is about staying at the embodiment level of naming what's arising in the moment. And because, again, things are always moving, things are always arising, and you get to name them. And through that process of being in the group work together, you're going to get to know yourself so fucking well. You're going to really get clear about what's story and what isn't. And there are going to be so many opportunities to open up the wounds. I think of wounds as like Word documents that you can open up and edit. So you can open up the Word document, the wound, and edit it in a way that feels good to you, and create a new story around it. You're banking new evidence. So that's where I'm going to leave you today. Thank you for watching. Again, leave me questions, let me know where you're at, and we'll stay connected. All right, bye.